Hey guys, tonight we begin with a humble truth. Sometimes history doesn't kill you with drama, sometimes it kills you with mildew. While some imagine medieval castles as majestic fortresses of bravery and honour, the truth is you're sleeping beside a bucket that knows too much and talks with its smell. These walls may have hosted kings, yes, but not all kings reigned from thrones. Some ruled from privies, some died on stairs, and most days you're one slipper away from the same fate. There's grandeur in the architecture, sure, but it's the kind of grandeur that leaks from the ceiling and grows moss on the tapestries. Stone doesn't warm up, it just stops fighting you around mid-afternoon. Until then, your job is to not slip, not sneeze, and not anger anyone who owns a belt with a crest on it. The bucket's not even the worst part, it's the silence around it, the way everyone pretends it's not there, even when it's clearly winning the battle for room temperature. And still, somehow, you're lucky. You have walls, you have a roof. You're inside. That counts for something, sort of. So before you get comfy, if this rhythm speaks to you, let it show. Like, subscribe, and say hi in the comments. Let me know where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting through history with us. Welcome to your life as a castle underling. Now dim the lights, lie back, take a few deep, relaxing breaths. Imagine the scent of sour linen, damp wood, and something vaguely herbal from the cook's bad knee poultice. It clings to your nose like unpaid debt. You're in the right place. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the rooster, not metaphorically. You wake because the rooster sleeps inside, and someone's trained it badly. It caws, then shuffles back into the hay, like it didn't just summon all the ghosts in the pantry. Your bed is a board. Your mattress is a flattened sack of barley husks that now holds more fleas than filler. Your blanket is damp wool, shared with someone named Tomlin, who coughs like his lungs are rehearsing to leave. You shift. You regret shifting. The floor is colder than confession. The hearth died hours ago, and no one dared waste kindling. Fire is reserved for noble backsides, and meat that matters. Your shift begins at dawn, but dawn is a generous term in this part of the keep. Here time is measured by drips, water squeezing through stone, and mice dragging things that were once food. Your job? Clean out the chamber pots before the steward wakes. You rise, you find your boots, not by sight, but by smell. One is soaked, the other is missing its sole, which makes it, philosophically speaking, a sock. The chamber pot is full. Someone didn't aim well. You think it was the old washerwoman who swears she's blind in one eye, but seems to find coins on the floor just fine. You hold the pot at arm's length. It sloshes. Something moves. You try not to know what. You carry it through the corridor, feet numb, shoulders hunched, praying not to slip. The corridor stones are slick with moss, or fat, or something worse. You learn early not to ask questions the stones can answer with scent. Outside, the sky hasn't decided on day yet. It's a sort of bruised grey, like a fade in memory or a punishment half remembered. Cold needles your skin through every stitch in your tunic. The outer wall greets you with wind sharp enough to file a blade. The pot goes into the latrine chute, which is carved directly over the moat. Gravity does the holy work. You listen, splash, relief, not yours, the pot's. You breathe through your mouth, but it's too late. The smell has already voted and claimed your sinuses. This will stay with you through breakfast. Some argue this chore built resilience among the lower classes. Others say it spread lice and existential despair. You return to the sleeping room just in time to see Tomlin steal your dry sock. A minor betrayal. It won't be the last today. You sit, you scratch, you whisper to no one in particular. Only 6 more days until Sunday, which in this castle means stew again, and possibly fewer rats. But you're not done. You still have to draw the morning bucket from the cistern, pray it isn't frozen, and rinse the pots with water that hurts more than it helps. On the way to the courtyard well, you cross paths with a night squire who doesn't nod. He never does. Too busy learning the art of looking tired without doing anything. His boots are dry, his tunic is clean. You fantasize briefly about pushing him into the trough. Instead, you lower your gaze and keep walking. You reach the well. The rope is frozen stiff. You kick it gently to loosen it, which is also how a stable boy cracked 3 fingers last week. You're careful. You lower the bucket, creak, splash, haul. This is your morning symphony. The water is sharp and metallic. You toss it in the pot, swish, and pour it out into the gravel drain. It immediately begins freezing in place. A small iced-over rebellion. You haul the pot back to its corner. 1 down, 4 to go. Tomlin's still pretending to be asleep. You don't wake him. Let him dream. Someone should. You are sent to retrieve a haunch of salted pork. This should be easy. It is not easy. The pantry is 3 stories above the kitchen. No stairs, no pulleys, just a ladder made of timber that's been nailed, re-nailed, and possibly prayed over by 6 different cooks. The ladder leans against a wall no one trusts. It doesn't touch the ground, it settles on it, like it's afraid of commitment. The wood is dark with age and grease from a century of hands that all regretted this exact task. You grab the lowest rung, it holds. That's good. You begin to climb. Rung 2 wobbles, rung 3 wheezes. By rung 5, the ladder begins to sing, not with music, but with long aching creaks that echo up the shaft, like a dirge for knees. This pantry shaft has no railing, no wall to press against, just an open drop, and the occasional rat watching from a crossbeam like it's judging your form. Some argue this vertical storage design saved space in crowded castles. Others say it just killed people more efficiently. Halfway up, you pause to adjust your grip. Your hands are slick, not with sweat. This isn't sweat. This is the thin, oily residue of 600 roasted meats that have made this climb before you. Above, the hatch to the pantry yawns open, like a hungry mouth. You wonder, not for the first time, why they store salted pork so far from the kitchen. A mystery, perhaps a cruel joke, or a punishment no one remembers. You reach the top and haul yourself onto the wooden slat platform. It bows, groaning. You freeze. The platform doesn't collapse. It just reminds you that it could if it ever stopped being so polite. Inside, the pantry is dark, always dark, even at noon. Light filters through a slit window, covered in cobwebs, and old herbs meant to ward off spoilage and spirits. You're not sure which it's failing at more. You find the pork. It's wrapped in coarse cloth and hung on an iron hook that squeals when turned. Lifting it down requires both arms, which means no hands on the ladder for the way back. You sigh. You've done worse, probably. You wedge the pork under one arm and begin the descent, slowly, carefully, step, creak, step, whisper of rope. Something scuttles below. You don't look. Halfway down, you sneeze. The pork jerks. You don't fall, but the ladder moans loud enough to bring 2 kitchen boys running. You land hard but safe. The pork slaps your shoulder as if to thank you. You hand it over to the cook. She grunts, doesn't say thank you, points to a bucket. It's fish head duty next. But let's back up. There's a rule in this castle that no one speaks aloud. If you're sent up the ladder before noon, someone higher up wants to see if you're worth keeping around. It's not an execution. It's a calculation. You're skinny, replaceable. You've only been here a month. No family, no coin, no clout. If you slip and crack a rib, the steward records a loss, not a tragedy. And this isn't even the worst ladder. There's a shorter one by the armoury that gave a page a permanent limp and a stammer. The page now polishes buckles and avoids doorways. Each step now feels like a test of balance, of faith, of tendon strength. You've learned to grip with your elbows and move like a shadow. No sudden movements, no thinking. The ladder's middle rungs bend. You count them every time, 1 through 9. If 9 creaks twice, you move faster. If it doesn't creak at all, it means it's wet, and wet wood lies. The smell up here is unique, wood smoke mingled with cured meat, rat droppings, and lavender gone sour. Your nose twitches, but there's no room to sneeze again. By the time you reach the bottom, your calves are shaking. You want to sit. You do not sit. The kitchen is a whirlwind. Your re-entry is ignored. Everyone's too busy throwing potatoes and insults. The pork disappears from your hands, like a relay baton. You're handed a new task with the same gesture someone uses to toss a bone to a dog. The ladder, meanwhile, creaks again as it settles back into place, awaiting its next victim. The kitchen is not a room, it is a battlefield, and the soup is winning. You enter carrying the fish bucket, because the cook told you to, and because arguing with someone who has a permanent burn scar shaped like a ladle is unwise. The moment you step through the doorway, your vision blurs. The air is thicker than broth. Steam and smoke twist together into a vapour you taste before you breathe. It smells of boiled marrow, spilled beer, rat musk, and a hint of mint from the steward's chewing habit. The walls sweat, the ceilings drip. The stones beneath your boots hiss with grease so old it has a family name. Your job today, assist the cook, which means everything from catching falling cuts of meat to wiping up things that should never have hit the floor. You are a walking apology with a fish bucket. The cauldron in the centre of the room bubbles like it's trying to tell you something. Inside there are bones, unlabelled. It was once turnip stew. It has since evolved. You're handed a long ladle with a splinter in the handle, and the smell of despair soaked into its wood grain. Skim the scum, the cook says. You lean in. The surface is foamy, greyish, and moving on its own. You're not sure what's scum and what's ingredient. You skim it anyway. It clings to the ladle like jellyfish, wet, wobbling, tenacious. Not like that, the cook snaps. She grabs your wrist, her grip like a meat hook. Like this. What are you, raised in a monastery? You are not, but you miss the silence. Some historians believe these kitchens were the most complex operations in the entire castle, run with military precision. Others insist they were glorified furnaces of chaos, fueled by short tempers and whatever didn't rot first. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the smoke. Castle kitchens were sprawling, hierarchical beasts. Dozens of people worked in staggered rhythm. Butchers, bakers, spit-turners, scullions, and the terrifying being known only as the pastry mistress. Meals for hundreds, sometimes thousands, were conjured from memory, instinct, and guesswork, often without recipes, timers, or even consistent fire. Orders came down like battlefield commands. Boil this, skin that, fetch more fat. There were logistics involved, timing, rationing, fire management, but no one tells you how often the butter caught fire, or that the salt barrel went missing because someone slept in it, or that 3 cooks once got into a fistfight over which pig was more festive. At the top of it all stood the cook, a figure both revered and feared, with burn marks like medals and a voice that could cut through steel. Below them, chaos was tolerated until it wasn't. One spilled ladle could mean a lost meal. One burned stew could spark a beating. Still, the cooks endured. They didn't just prepare food, they tamed hunger, politics and plumbing, all while standing in puddles of their own making. Behind you, the assistant cook is defeathering a goose using her bare hands, and a bucket of near-boiling water. The smell of wet feathers mixes with burnt oats and something vaguely metallic. She hums as she works. Her hands are bright red. You can't tell if from heat or habit. A rat darts across the hearth ledge. The dog sees it and doesn't care. No one cares anymore. Someone spills the tripe tub. It flops to the floor like discarded laundry and is quickly kicked aside with a boot. Clean-up will come later. Maybe. You're past a bundle of carrots. Your hands are too wet. They drop. You bend to retrieve them. One rolls under a table where something has been growing in the dark. You leave it. In the corner, an older boy is stirring a second pot with a stick. Not a ladle, a literal stick. It's scorched at one end and wrapped in twine for grip. You wonder how many meals that stick has seen, how many it outlived. A girl no older than 9 slams a cleaver into a parsnip like it insulted her ancestors. The rhythm of chopping echoes like drum beats through the hot air. It's then you notice the blackened wall above the hearth. A shape burned there, half silhouette, half superstition. They say it was from the fire that took old Martin, the stewmaster, who died mid-ladle last winter. They never scrubbed it off. They say it brings flavour. You're told to mop the stones with vinegar water. The vinegar burns your nose and eyes. The rag you're handed smells like it's already cleaned something living. You try not to think about what. By noon, you are soaked, scorched, splattered, and starved. You sneak a bite of a crust left on a tray. It's hard enough to chip a tooth. You chew anyway. The cook notices, says nothing, just nods toward the stack of logs by the oven. Firewood duty. Again. Nature calls. Unfortunately, in Castle Rookmere, nature has no patience, no privacy, and absolutely no plumbing. It begins as a mild discomfort, easy to ignore while hauling firewood or untangling goose feathers from twine. But discomfort swells to urgency, and urgency becomes a kind of prayer. You try to distract yourself. You count the number of stones in the passageway. You hum the monk's chant the cook hates. You press your thighs together, like your honour depends on it. By the time your teeth start clenching, you've reached the final stage. Bargaining. Maybe you can wait. Maybe the cook will let you leave early. Maybe you'll develop a bladder of iron through sheer will. Or maybe, and this is the more likely option, you'll be immortalised forever as the boy who didn't make it. The castle's toilet, if you can call it that, is a vertical arrangement of indifference and wind. The guardrobe is a stone box wedged into the outer wall, open to the moat below. No hinges, no lock, no warmth. Just a wooden plank with a hole cut through it and the unwelcome feeling of exposure from every direction. The wind screams through the shaft like it's telling ghost stories to the rats. The guard's relief schedule dictates when and who gets access to the guardrobe. You are not a guard. You are not even adjacent to a guard, which means your only chance is to sneak in during the 3-minute window after a night's bowel movement and before the chambermaid arrives to throw vinegar water at the walls. You run, not nobly, not gracefully. It's more of a tight-hipped hobble, the kind that says, if I sneeze, we both lose. Your tunic is too long. Your boots slap on wet stone. You nearly collide with a torch sconce. You murmur apologies to inanimate objects. You pray no noble sees you like this, face red, gait strained, clutching your dignity like it owes you rent. Some historians believe these guardrobes were marvels of medieval sanitation, gravity-fed, away from food and bedding, efficient in their design. The vertical shafts led directly to cesspits or castle moats, flushing waste with every rainstorm. They often included clever features, angled chutes, refuse basins, even small drains lined with pebbles. Certain castles in France and Wales were known to use sand or moss as medieval toilet paper. A few even had double-seaters for the socially brave, but other scholars suggest these were more a gesture than a solution. The smell lingered in the stones, the draught crept into corridors, and what didn't wash away simply stayed, clinging to boots, rats, and reputations. As one chronicler put it, a garderobe never forgets. You reach the corridor and stop short. A guard leans against the entryway, arms folded, helmet tipped slightly down, either asleep or performing a one-man protest against the idea of movement. His name is Elric. No one calls him that. He's known as gatepost because he never shifts and he never listens. You clear your throat. Nothing. You cough politely, then urgently. Still nothing. I need to inspect the garderobe, you offer. One eyelid lifts slightly. Inspecting, he repeats. Yes, the hinge. It made a noise yesterday. Could cause alarm during night watches. There's no hinge. Exactly. That's the problem. He doesn't budge. Neither does your bladder. The pain now pulses. You begin imagining the moisture on your skin is your own body giving up. You shift your weight and try again. The steward sent me. No, he didn't. I meant the steward's assistant. He doesn't exist. You both stare at each other in the soft glow of the torchlight. Two souls locked in the dumbest battle in castle history. Finally, Elric sighs. It's not a sound of mercy, it's a sound of boredom. He pushes off the wall, muttering something about leeks and gout, and walks off with the slow satisfaction of someone who knows they've won. You slide into the garderobe before he changes his mind. It is exactly what you feared and less. A knee-high stone bench with a single hole cut clean through. The wood is slick, the stone is wet, the wind is cruel. You sit carefully, regretfully, wincing at both temperature and splinters. The walls are carved with names, mostly crude, some misspelled, a few noble crests with what you assume are rude additions. There's a faint charcoal drawing of a goat doing something anatomically improbable. The window slit is barely wide enough to let in light, but it does let in birdsong. You hear one now, sharp and judgmental. You exhale. At last. The relief is full body, almost holy. You stare down the shaft. Below, the moat gurgles, mist rises. You imagine you can hear the ghosts of meals past sighing into the water. And then, a footstep. Your blood freezes. The door has no latch. You lean forward slightly, covering the gap with your cloak. A shadow passes, pauses. You do not breathe. After an eternity, it moves on. You wait 10 extra seconds just to be sure. Some say the garderobe was the one place where rank vanished. Knight or cook, page or countess, everyone sat the same way, stared at the same stone wall, and hoped their shift wouldn't collapse beneath them. Others say it was a test of endurance, of humility, of how long you could hold your breath. You finish quickly. You don't bother with moss. You straighten your tunic, push open the heavy door, and step out into daylight, like a survivor of something no bard will ever bother to write down. You pass Elric on the way back. The hinge, he asks. You meet his gaze. Didn't scream, just sighed. He smirks. Same. You are assigned to clean the linen cupboard. A misleading term, if ever there was one. You're imagining folded stacks, the scent of lavender, perhaps a sunbeam catching dust like magic. What you get instead is a room that smells like a wet dog died trying to escape a burning haystack. The cupboard is less of a cupboard, and more of a stone cell with shelves. The walls are damp, the floor is uneven, the ceiling drips in one corner and sheds plaster in another. A pile of ropes leans in the back like it lost the will to coil. The linens are not clean. They are not organised. They are not even entirely linen. Some are old wool blankets repurposed into bandages. Others are stained with substances you could swear are breathing. A few still have initials stitched in from people you've never met and hope never to resemble. Your task is simple. Sort, stack, fold, and try not to catch anything that can't be washed off with vinegar. You start with a tunic, it's stiff, possibly armoured with dirt. You shake it. A puff of grey drifts out, followed by a beetle, then a second beetle, then what might be the beetle's extended family. Some historians argue that medieval linen storage was carefully managed, with natural repellents like lavender, wormwood, and dried rosemary hung in bundles from beams and tucked into folds. It was believed that the scent alone could drive away lice, fleas, and evil humours, the trifecta of any good castle infestation. In theory, It sounds charming. In practice, those herbs were often mouldy themselves, swapped seasonally, if at all, and sometimes chewed by mice before they had a chance to repel anything. At Kenilworth Castle, records show that Queen Eleanor's chambermaids hung rosemary branches by the dozen, one for every corner of the linen press. And yet, a winter log noted 5 separate outbreaks of biting skin sorrow in the same corridor. Some blamed the damp, others blamed a maid with witch's breath. No one blamed the Queen. In some halls, linen was buried in cold ash overnight to purify it. In others, it was beaten with broom bristles or aired out over boiling vinegar. Occasionally, strips were soaked in lye, left to dry in the sun, and stiffened into brittle flags of hygiene no one wanted to touch. The steward once claimed his grandmother used garlic skins and holy salt to ward off mites. When asked if it worked, he said she died during soup, which no one questioned further. Others say it wasn't about the herbs at all. It was about movement. Keep things shifting, turning, folded anew each week, and the lice didn't have time to settle. You look at the pile in front of you. Nothing here has moved in months. A beetle climbs from the edge of a folded smock. You meet its gaze. It does not blink. You pick up a cloth anyway. It's warm. You don't ask why. A rope slips off a shelf and slaps the ground with a sound that, in a better castle, would cause alarm. You jump anyway. Behind it, a rat scurries from under the stack, gives you a glance and disappears behind a loose plank. It's not afraid, just disappointed. You sneeze. The dust is dense enough to taste. You can identify hay, ash, and what might be flour from a century ago. It coats your throat like punishment and leaves your nose itching long after the air clears. You pick up another folded cloth. This one feels damp. Not recently damp, permanently damp. It sticks to your skin like a bad decision. You try not to think about who last wore it or what they were doing. Judging by the shape, it involved sitting, sweating, and losing. You scratch your wrist again and again. A red welt blooms. Then another, then a rash, quick as fire and just as welcome. You step outside for air. The sun doesn't help. Your skin prickles like it remembers every linen you've ever touched. You suspect the cupboard has infected your memories. Inside, someone calls for you. You duck back in, coughing. The rope pile has shifted. A single white sheet lies draped across the shelf like a ghost trying not to get involved. You stack it anyway. It hisses, not literally, but emotionally. The steward arrives just as you finish. He peers into the cupboard, wrinkles his nose and says, "Much better." You stare at him. Fingers raw, arms blotched with rash, and smile the smile of someone who has learned nothing is ever truly clean. He leaves. You scratch. You move on. There's a hallway in the east wing that always smells like metal and misplaced pride. That's the armoury. And today, it's your turn to polish the weapons. Not the noble ones, not the pretty ones that get paraded out during weddings and drawn sheaths during dances. No, these are the leftovers, the wall swords, the extras, the ones that weren't important enough to be stolen or bloodied or named. You are handed a cloth, a stub of beeswax, and pointed toward a rack of things that once belonged to very tired men who didn't live long enough to complain about rust. Some of the blades are curved, some chipped, a few so pitted they look like they were used to saw through stone or stew bones. You start with a dagger. It is sticky. This raises questions you do not want answered. You scrub. The cloth turns dark almost immediately, black with age, red with implication. You fold it, keep wiping, fold again. The blade underneath is still dull. The metal, despite your best efforts, insists on remaining matte. It reflects just enough light to remind you how little it likes your face. Behind you, chainmail slouches over a rack, like it gave up halfway through a march. The links rattle every time the wind shifts. You try not to look. You try not to imagine it sighing. Some historians argue that weapon maintenance was a sacred ritual in medieval castles, part of the daily rites of survival. Pages and squires learned to oil leather, de-rust iron, and keep a sword's edge sharp enough to shave with. Others suggest it was more chaotic, hurried work done by sleepy boys with half-frozen fingers and no sense of what direction the blade should face. You are clearly part of the second group. The room is neither cold nor hot. It's that special temperature reserved for old tools and stale ambition. There's a thick tang in the air, iron filings, old sweat, charcoal dust, and that strange sweetness that metal sometimes breathes when it's been ignored too long. A shield stares at you from the wall. It's dented in the centre, a single perfect curve, like someone once punched it with a planet. You wonder if the knight behind it made it home. Probably not. Most things in this room didn't. Your hand cramps. You switch to your left. Your left hand is worse. You drop the cloth. You pick it up. The dagger rolls off the bench and lands on your boot. The toe aches. You pretend not to notice. You pick up a spearhead. It's almost pretty. Broad, symmetrical, etched faintly along the side with a pattern that might be decorative or might be a warning. The shaft is gone. Splintered. The point is still intact. You angle it toward the light to notice a hairline crack down the side. You rub at it. It stays. You nod as if this means something. A helmet lies nearby, crusted with age. You tap it gently. It thunks like a drum with too much dignity. Inside straw. Someone stored it stuffed, maybe to dry it. Maybe just to keep its shape. You smell it. You regret smelling it. Not far off, a suit of armour leans against the wall. Not mounted, not displayed. Just leaning, like it arrived late and never found a seat. You don't touch it. It looks touchy. You return to the swords. One of them is heavy. Not in weight, but in story. You can tell by the notch in the hilt, the way the grip is wrapped twice over, with dried leather, once red, now grey. You hold it gently. It feels like it remembers too much. You clean it anyway, carefully, quietly. You don't name it. That would be disrespectful. You do wonder if anyone else has touched it since the last person bled on it. A single fly buzzes around your head. You swat, it dances, you swat again. It lands on the sword, you pause. Stand off, it wins. You take a break. Sitting on a chest, you flex your fingers. They crack. The cloth in your lap is almost black. You could probably wring it out and summon some minor curse. The door creaks open. No one enters, just the wind. You don't look up. You don't trust the armoury when it's being subtle. Some say the armoury is haunted, not by ghosts exactly, but by memory. Every weapon still smells like adrenaline. Every dent tells a story with no names. Even the rust, they say, forms faster around the blades that once mattered. You lean back, you stare at the ceiling. The rafters are thick, lined with cobwebs. A single candle guttering in an iron sconce throws shadows that look almost human. You close your eyes, not for long, just long enough to forget where you are. A clang wakes you, not near, somewhere down the corridor, not your problem. You stand, stretch, and return to the rack. You clean another blade. It's missing a tip. You call it almost. You smile, just a little. Then you get back to work. You are assigned to dust the windows on the east stairwell. This is widely understood as a punishment. Not an official one. Nothing in the castle ever is. But tasks travel down the chain of command like spoiled meat. Passed, rewrapped, and finally dumped where no one will complain. That's how it lands on your back. Or more specifically, your hands, with a rag and a stool that wobbles when you exhale too hard. The stairwell is narrow, curved and clammy. You know the stones intimately now. They sweat when it rains, groan when it's cold, and harbour scents you've stopped trying to name. The dust here is a different species, not like kitchen dust or linen dust. This dust is older, denser, it has opinions, and the window, the one they warn you about, is halfway up. A slotted arch with glass so thin and old, it flexes slightly in wind. The glass is greenish, not by design, it's just tired. They call it the cursed window, quietly. casually, like someone might call a friend's uncle unwell after he was caught talking to a turnip. You heard about it before you even started working here. Don't linger, they say. Don't look too long. No one ever explains what happens if you do, just that someone once did, and now their shadow still shows up around sunset. Another joke, probably. The climb up is slow. The stairwell tightens as it rises, like it regrets being built. You duck under a low beam where someone once carved a crude symbol. A ward, maybe, or boredom. You reach the window and set down your tools, rag, vinegar, patched linen gloves that smell like bad cheese and worse luck. The air is colder here. You try not to think about why. Wind snakes in through the stonework, somehow managing to be both damp and sharp. It smells like old rain and iron nails. You begin to clean. The first swipe smears, the second catches. The third lifts a layer of grime so thick you briefly see your own reflection and don't recognise it. Some historians believe stairwell windows served practical and symbolic roles: light sources, arrow slits, spiritual symbols. This one feels like none of those. It's too low for archery, too high for contemplation. Its only job, as far as you can tell, is to make people nervous. The ledge beneath the window is scored with scratches. Not decorative, not deliberate, just marks, dozens of them. Some straight, some jagged, one that looks like it was carved with a spoon or a tooth. You try not to guess which. There's a hairline crack at the base of the pane. You brush near it. It twitches. You step back. The glass doesn't break, but it wobbles just slightly, like it's breathing. A pigeon watches from the opposite roofline. You wonder if it's waiting for the window to do something. A chill creeps into your fingertips. You blow on them. The gloves are damp now, maybe from the stone, maybe from your own sweat. You rub your knuckles. You keep cleaning. Your mind drifts. They say the girl who used to clean this window vanished. Walked down the stairs and never came out the other end. Some say she eloped. Some say she fell. Some say she was eaten by the wall itself. You're not sure which sounds worse. You look outside. The view is ordinary. Fields, trees, the West Gatehouse. The world goes on. Carts trundle. Someone waves laundry. A goose harasses a monk. All the usual joys of castle life. And yet, the window feels wrong. Not dangerous, just slightly misaligned with reality. You look away. You wipe again. A flake of something peels off the sill. Grey, curled, not quite stone. You pocket it without meaning to. You don't know why. The stool shifts under your weight. One leg scrapes. You freeze. You've cleaned 4 windows today. This one is slower. Every motion feels watched, judged, copied. You pause. You speak to no one in particular. Almost done. You say it again. Just louder than your breath. The wind answers by slamming somewhere below. A door. You finish the pane. You wipe down the ledge. You shake out the rag. It's darker than it was when you started. You don't remember the light changing. You descend the stairwell more quickly than usual. Not quite running, just eager. Some believe castles hold memories in their stones. That place is touched by grief or fear where grooves like footpaths. Others say it's nonsense. Just draft and shadow and stories told too often. You don't argue with either camp. You've seen how damp can move like breath and how cracks can grow like veins. You've watched a cobweb twitch when no one's near it. At the bottom of the stair, your foot lands wrong. You catch yourself. You laugh. Then you scratch your palm where the flake from the window still rests and feel something prick. A splinter. You decide not to mention the window to anyone. Not yet. Maybe never. You're summoned to serve at the evening meal. Not just help. Serve. Direct contact with nobles. Eye contact discouraged. Mistakes discouraged. Movement discouraged unless absolutely necessary and invisible at the same time. It's a riddle in the form of labour. The great hall is already loud when you arrive. Candles drip, meat sweats, Lords shout as though their voices are still jousting. Somewhere, a minstrel tunes an instrument with 2 strings and 1 grudge. The long tables creak under the weight of expectation and food. Loaves like bricks, sausages in suspicious shapes, trout stiff with lemon and judgment. A single pheasant so overcooked its ghost is hovering overhead in protest. Your job is to carry trays and not trip. You fail at neither, which is a kind of victory. You hold your breath as you pass Lord Jervil, who once made a steward cry over undersalted porridge. He doesn't look at you, he never does, but his dog does. A little grey thing with the soul of a bad bishop. It snarls. You walk faster. On the high table a cheese begins to run. Literally. You think it was meant to be firm. It is not. It is heading east at a surprising pace. A squire catches it just in time, with a piece of bread and the reflexes of someone who's seen things. Some historians believe castle feasts were communal celebrations of bounty and power. Lavish, symbolic, a reflection of status and generosity. Others say they were cautionary tales in 5 courses. Food was rarely fresh, storage was suspect, and everyone involved was either constipated or poisoned within a week. You refill a jug of watered wine. The spout dribbles onto your sleeve. It smells faintly of mushrooms and something medicinal. You serve it anyway. Behind you, a boy drops a trencher. Flatbread hits floor, flips once, lands gravy side up on someone's shoe. You do not turn around. You do not make eye contact with tragedy. You've heard tales, a knight who choked on a bad fig, a baron's niece who sneezed during a prayer and was banished, a minstrel who drank too much cider and claimed to see angels, only to fall into the brazier mid-hymn. None of these stories are confirmed. All of them feel true. You carry a plate of sliced venison. It wobbles. You correct. You wobble. You correct again. Your ankle twinges from yesterday's climb up the pantry shaft. No one notices. You begin to feel like a ghost made of errands. At the far end of the table, a lord argues with a priest about whether fish sauce counts as meat. You cannot believe how loudly they're saying the word eels. You pause to breathe behind a column. Your hands are shaking slightly. Not from nerves, from hunger. You haven't eaten since midday, and even then it was half a radish and a piece of bread that tasted like regret. You watch as a maid replaces a trencher. Her hand trembles slightly. A bead of sweat slides down her temple. It could be heat. It could be fear. It could be fever. You make a mental note not to share cups with anyone this week. One of the nobles bites into a pear and frowns like he's been insulted. The fruit, apparently, had ideas. He sets it down. A servant rushes to remove it. You wonder where it'll go. Back to the kitchen, to the dogs, to the compost heap that feeds the castle's inner garden, where those same pears are grown again. The full cycle of culinary vengeance. A gout of laughter explodes at the high table. A noblewoman covers her mouth with a napkin and coughs into it. The napkin comes away, darker than it should. She folds it quickly. You keep walking. The candles sputter in their holders. The room smells of roasted meat, hot wax, stale feet, and something you cannot name. Something under the table. Something old. You pick up a goblet, and your thumb slips slightly inside. It's wet, warm. You hand it off without flinching. Some say the greatest danger in a medieval castle was the sword. Others say it was the spoon, used improperly, handled by everyone, and rarely washed with more than intention. You reach for a flagon and your wrist cramps. You pretend it doesn't. You dream briefly of the infirmary and the cool touch of a poultice. Then you remember the last boy who went in with cramps. He came out with fewer fingers. One lord belches so loudly a torch sputters. Someone behind you faints. The room does not pause. Another servant drags them out by the armpits. You keep moving. You deliver another tray. Your foot brushes against something soft beneath the table. A spilled cloth? A dog? A body? You don't check. At the end of the night, after the feast, you're sent to the kitchen with leftovers, which means crusts, bones, and anything that once had colour but now does not. You are told not to eat anything. You nod. You eat nothing, except for a single grape you pretend not to find in your pocket. It tastes of dust and maybe salvation. You wash your hands in a bowl of water that turns pink by the third rinse. You wipe your mouth with a sleeve already crusted from 3 previous meals. You sit briefly by the scullery door. You scratch your leg. You listen to the last clinking goblets. You survived the feast, and you didn't even taste it. You're told you've drawn moat duty. No explanation, no argument, just a rope, a pole, and a pointed finger toward the outer wall. The moat is not romantic. It is not defensive. It is not, by any definition, water. What it is, tepid, dark, and vaguely mobile, a soup of old rain, newer sewage, unclaimed debris, and creatures no one will name without spitting afterward. The smell is legendary. It precedes you. You walk through it before you arrive. Some say the moat was once clear. That fish swam in it. That ducks floated across it like punctuation on the castle's perimeter. No one says that now. If a duck landed in it today, it would probably dissolve. You arrive at the edge just as the sun vanishes behind the tower. The light dies fast here. It's as if the moat absorbs it. Your instructions. Use the pole to check for blockages. That's it. What constitutes a blockage? You're not told. You suspect the last person who asked is still in the moat. You take the pole. It's taller than you, slightly slimy, and smells like regret. You poke the surface. It resists. Not solid, not liquid. Something in between, like it hasn't made up its mind. The pole sinks slowly. You feel it drag. Something's down there. You pull it back. Something tugs. You don't scream. You do step back. The pole comes out clean. Suspiciously clean. You look at the steward, who nods as if this confirms something. He walks off. You're left alone with the rope, the pole, and the water that doesn't ripple. It shifts. You edge closer and begin again. Some historians argue moats were effective deterrents, especially when lined with spikes, filled with sewage, or used to control access during siege. Others argue they became more symbolic over time, no longer defensive, just ornamental reservoirs of bacterial ambition. You're beginning to see the latter. A rat floats by. Its eyes are open. It's wearing something, maybe a ribbon, maybe a curse. You nod respectfully. You circle the edge with the rope tied to your waist. It's not for safety. It's to pull you out, should you fall in, which, historically, means dragging out a slightly more ruined version of yourself. You slip. Slightly. Your heart slips more. You keep walking. The moat is ringed by moss, the green kind that looks soft and absolutely isn't. It clings to your boots like guilt. You reach a bend where the wall juts out, forming a shadowed cove. Something bobs. You stop. It's a barrel, or a body, or a very tired pig. Hard to tell from here. You prod it. It's a barrel. The lid lifts slightly. You do not check inside. A moment later the barrel sinks. Not quickly, just decisively. You add barrel retrieval to your mental list of things to never volunteer for. The smell thickens. Your nose stops fighting. It gives up. You breathe through your mouth, which is worse. The taste is metallic, fungal, ancient, like licking history's worst secret. You feel something crawl along your ankle. It is probably nothing, possibly something. You don't look. Looking invites naming. Naming invites nightmares. A gust of wind shifts the water. You see shapes, not specific, just suggestions. The moat remembers things. You think it remembers you now. You consider singing, just to keep yourself company. But the last person who sang on moat duty was mocked for a week, and then he disappeared. You poke again. The pole hits something solid. You press. It resists. You push harder. It gives way with a wet pop and something bubbles to the surface. It looks like a chair. Maybe. Hard to tell under the moss and fish bones. You note the position. You do not investigate. A single frog leaps across the path. It lands, waits, and then hops toward the castle. You wonder what it knows. You've been out here for an hour. Maybe 2. Time doesn't behave normally around the moat. You begin to feel porous, like the water is thinking of ways inside you. Your hands itch, not from anything visible, from possibility. You finally hear the bell. End of duty. You coil the rope. You drop the pole. You don't look back. You don't rinse your boots. You don't speak to anyone on your way in. You sit outside the kitchen door. Your legs throb. Your skin feels tight. Your mouth tastes like moldy copper. You pull something from your boot, a twig, a spine, a very firm worm. You throw it in the fire. You say nothing. You sleep badly that night. Some believe moat duty was a rite of passage, a test of courage and silence. Others believe it was simple hazing. Either way, no one ever does it twice by choice. Tomorrow, someone else will carry the pole, and the moat will remember. You sneak away to the chapel. Not to pray, though you consider it. More for the quiet and the heat. There's a brazier here that sometimes works, sometimes smokes, sometimes belches sparks like it's possessed, but it's warmer than the barracks, and no one yells at you in Latin when you sit still. The chapel is small, stone, vaulted, undecorated, unless you count soot stains as art. A cracked window lets in a line of moonlight that catches on dust and dry rot. The pews creak when you touch them. The altar cloth has been eaten along one edge by something that prefers holy fibre. You sit in the second row, not front, not back, the middle, where one can observe both piety and exits. Your hands still smell faintly of moat. You don't ask forgiveness. You doubt forgiveness has ever entered this room without slipping. Some historians say chapels were the safest place in a castle, thick-walled, centrally located, shielded by spiritual reverence. Others point out they were often built beneath towers with questionable foundations and were filled with candles, wooden beams, and people on the verge. The priest is asleep in the corner. He snores like someone trying to remember his own name. A mouse watches him from the lectern, cleaning its face with exaggerated care. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to pause. You count breaths, you count bruises, you count your own ribs, just to check they're still in their usual number. The chapel shifts, not metaphorically, literally. A creak, a groan, then silence. You open your eyes, everything looks the same, but now the air tastes of dust. You look up. The ceiling, the stone, the weight. You move, not quickly, just enough to be missed by the first falling bit. The ceiling gives way with a sound that feels personal. A slab lands where you sat. Not big enough to kill, maybe, but enough to flatten. You don't scream. There's no one to hear. The priest continues to snore. The mouse flees with dignity. You crawl behind the altar, mouth full of grit, mind full of scenarios where this was divine timing or divine spite. The dust settles like a verdict. You sit there, coughing and laughing, because what else is there? Some say death in a medieval castle came from swords, arrows, knives, that it wore a face and called your name. Others say it came as quiet stone from above, as soup too long simmered, as a bad step on a good morning, as a goose with a vengeance. You believe the second group. You stand eventually. Your knees crack like kindling. You pat yourself down, no blood, just ash and embarrassment. You look at the slab, smooth, final. It makes your earlier bruises feel like suggestions. You walk out of the chapel, carefully, slowly, a man who has seen the roof. Outside, the night is colder than your intentions. The castle is quiet, but not safe, never safe. You pass the gate tower. Murder holes above you, designed to pour hot pitch, rocks, oil, or boiling water onto intruders, or onto anyone in the wrong place during training, or during lunch. One apprentice cook died last winter, walking beneath during a snow-clearing drill. No one ever explained why a pot of goose fat was stored on the 3rd floor, only that it landed. You walk faster, you pass the stable. A loose horse once kicked a messenger through a wall. You nod to the horse now, it blinks at you, possibly smug. You pass a guard cleaning his halberd with an intensity that makes you uncomfortable. You do not make eye contact. He is humming something without melody. You pass the wall where the mason fell last spring. They say he tripped on his own shoelace. Except no one had shoelaces, only string, which makes it worse. You return to the undercroft, where you sleep. Your straw sack is flatter than before. Your blanket smells of someone else's feet. You lie down anyway. Above you, wooden beams. Just wood. Just architecture. Just risk. You listen to the castle breathing, stones shifting, mice arguing in the walls, someone whimpering from a dream they haven't finished yet. You survived the chapel. You survived the feast. You survived the moat. You survived the ladder, the kitchen, the linen, the weapons, the garderobe, the rats. You are, in fact, the least important person in Castle Rookmere. And somehow still alive, you smile. Because survival here isn't just luck, it's inertia, it's reflex, it's learning which doors groan and which ones mean it. And it's knowing when the ceiling moves. Tomorrow they'll send you to clean the bell tower. You heard it sways in wind. You're already planning your route out. The average medieval castle wasn't designed to kill its inhabitants, but it often did. Long before siege towers and trebuchets were invented, the castle had already perfected the slow art of passive aggression through architecture. Not in grand cinematic bursts of destruction, but in drafts, seams, splinters, and poor decisions stacked atop each other, mortared by tradition and bad luck. Castle staircases were narrow, spiral, and deeply loyal to the right-handed defender. That means they wound clockwise going up, allowing defenders above to swing swords freely, while attackers below had their strikes blocked by the inner wall. Clever, yes, but also deadly. These stairs were often uneven, the treads shallow, the risers tall. Some were purposefully irregular to trip invaders. But there was no switch to turn this feature off for servants, elderly nobles, and others. Everyone tripped, everyone fell, and with stone at your back and in your face, falling meant injury. Falling often meant death. Then there were the ceilings. Roofs were made of timber, beams exposed, weight distributed poorly. Supports weakened over time by weather, mould, or birds nesting in the wrong spot. Vaulted stone ceilings were stronger but unforgiving. When they cracked, they didn't leak, they collapsed. This wasn't hypothetical. Chapels, towers, gatehouses, anywhere a wall met height was at risk. An inspection, rare. Prevention, primitive. Faith, misplaced. You also had murder holes. In theory, a good idea. Slits or openings above gateways, used to pour boiling water, hot pitch, or rocks onto intruders. In practice, more than one unfortunate cook was told to hold the kettle here while someone fetched the commander. Wind shifts, someone slips, and suddenly Geoffrey is soup. Moats, filled with promise, and everything else. Early ones were dry ditches, later water was added, then trash, then sewage, then corpses. During siege it became a strategy. Foul the moat to foul the morale. But after siege, the moat stayed. It fermented. It drowned more castle dwellers than it deterred enemies. Even the walls could turn on you. Parapets gave you height, but no shelter from wind, ice, or the occasional guard who decided to lean too far. And ramparts, designed for visibility, also allowed full exposure to arrows, boredom, and bad footing. A slip here didn't mean a bruise. It meant a 7-metre fall into either stone or story. The windows, meanwhile, were rarely transparent. Glass was rare. When it did appear, it warped with age and popped loose in storms. Many windows were just holes with wooden shutters. At night, they rattled open. In rain, they leaked. In winter, they howled. The wind could lift a shutter and slam it hard enough to break a hand or crack a skull. It happened. More than once. And then there was the fireplace. Yes, the fireplace, central to warmth, cooking, and the illusion of civilization. Also responsible for dozens of deaths. Chimneys were stone-lined, poorly vented, and rarely cleaned. Sparks flew, beams caught. Some castles burned from the inside out because someone left a spitfire unattended. And still, the real threat was rarely in the flame. It was in the soot, smoke inhalation in enclosed chambers, carbon monoxide before anyone named it, rooms sealed too tightly, a warm night that never ended. Ladders, made of green wood, hastily built, rarely tested. Climbing in castles was a contact sport. Maintenance was deferred. Repairs were improvised. When a rung snapped, you were lucky to walk away. Most didn't. The best part? These structures didn't just fail once. They failed in patterns. Towers collapsed in heavy storms because the roofline trapped water. Floors buckled above latrines because too many people thought, just one more bucket. Stairs broke from underneath because everyone kept stepping in the same place. And yet, castles endured. This place was not built for comfort, but you lived there anyway, because it had walls, because it had food, because it had lords and tapestries and prayers and possibly a roof. Because outside was worse, you adapted. You learned the sound of a beam that might give way. You memorized which windows rattled before they burst. You timed your steps to the staircase. You knocked on the murder hole before stepping under it. And if you didn't, the castle reminded you. One crack, one tilt, one splinter that wasn't there yesterday, and the stone made its point. It's easy to romanticize medieval feasts, long tables, roasted boars, goblets raised in dim halls echoing with laughter and loot. But that's the painting, not the plate. The real medieval meal was a risk assessment on a wooden slab, because food didn't just nourish you in a castle, it also tried to kill you. Start with storage. Meat was salted, dried, smoked or pickled. Vegetables were root cellared or left to their own devices. Dairy was consumed early, fermented fast or regretted later. Bread was often coarse, full of husks, and occasionally seasoned with tiny crunchy passengers. Mould? It happened. In bread, in cheese, in barrels. Most moulds were ignored. Some were considered flavour. A few were fatal. Flour wasn't sifted. Sometimes it wasn't even ground. There are accounts of entire families developing tremors or hallucinations from ergot-contaminated rye, an uninvited fungal guest that could simulate plague, madness, or divine punishment depending on the symptoms and the church calendar. Water? Not unless it was suspiciously clear. Ale was safer. So was cider. Even children drank it. Anything boiled was a blessing. Anything raw was a dare. Then there were the kitchens, the most physically dangerous place in the entire castle, and that includes the dungeons. Fire, knives, boiling fat, shouting cooks, livestock, and rush deadlines. Accidents happened often and loudly. Burns were common, so were cuts. Occasionally, someone fell into the soup, and the soup was never thrown out. Some historians argue the perpetual stew was an efficient culinary practice. Add scraps, simmer endlessly, and feed everyone. Others note that perpetual often included bones from last week, bread crusts from last month, and a goose leg that may have died of something no one wants to discuss. Herbs were added, not just for flavour, but for fear. Sage, mustard seed, garlic and wormwood. Culinary flavouring agents and ancient bug repellents, spiritual wardings and bad luck insurance. Food was a ritual, not to be questioned, certainly not to be refused, which brings us to etiquette. A misplaced spoon could be treason. Eating before your lord could be read as insult. Sitting too high at the table could lead to quiet exile, or sudden reassignment to moat duty. Complaining about salt levels? Social suicide. One wrong bite could ruin your reputation. Or, more literally, your gut. Cheese was aged to various degrees of boldness. Bold meaning soft, strong, and occasionally ambulatory. Eggs were tested by smell and float. Eel was a delicacy, but only when fresh, and fresh often meant wasn't warm this morning. Festivals offered delicacies, marzipan, sugared fruit, pomegranate if you were rich. But feasting was seasonal. Winter feasts came from barrels. Summer ones came from the garden. Autumn feasts were desperation in disguise. Spring? A gamble, leftover roots, dried fish, and wild greens that might be nettles or might be medicine, or might not be food at all. Illness from food was common. Stomach complaints were daily. Dysentery was seasonal. Vomiting was expected. Food poisoning could take down a whole household. There are castle records where 3 cooks were dismissed after a wedding feast ended with 19 guests collapsing and 1 noble vomiting into the baptismal font. Some blamed bad oysters, others blamed witches. The truth probably lived in the pie crust, and still, food was power. Nobles showed wealth through waste, refusing crusts, flinging bones, refusing to eat anything not freshly slaughtered. Peasants ate everything. Innards, skins, scraps. Gravy was the great equaliser, and salt was currency. Real currency. Entire arguments, land grants, inheritances, hinged on whose barrel was dry. Spices were coveted. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves and saffron. Not for taste, for spectacle. To prove you had the gold to burn your tongue. Spices covered rot. They also covered status. Some lords were buried with their pepper grinders. And yet, the meal was a moment of peace. It was where plans were made, marriages arranged, revenge discussed in whispers. Bread broke across old grudges, wine poured over new ones, and servants watched it all, moving silently, holding breath, and occasionally holding in worse. And for the servant, food was rarely hot, rarely fresh, often scavenged. A crust here, a piece of turnip from a dropped trencher, a fingertip dipped in gravy, that one grape you found in your pocket, dusted off and told no one about. Food was also punishment. The wrong meal led to punishment meals. Saltless oats, cold peas, hard bread. Meals served alone, meals denied entirely. And in the worst moments, food became message. A raw onion served as insult. A dish known to be hated served as humiliation. A cup not refilled. A tray taken too early. A toast not echoed. All intentional, all remembered. Because castles didn't have Yelp. They had kitchen gossip, and everyone knew who the cook liked, and who they'd rather see face first in the eel bucket. Some believe the greatest castle deaths came from war, betrayal, poison, but many of them came from dinner, or what followed, from stew that had simmered too long, from cheese that had crossed into theology, from the chicken that looked fine, and then didn't. You ate what you were given, you prayed for your gut, and if you lived, you did it again tomorrow, because in a castle food was rarely about hunger, it was about survival, and it still is. If swords didn't get you, and soup didn't betray you, the weather would. Not the dramatic kind, not lightning bolts from an angry god, just the daily, low-grade misery of medieval climate control, which is to say, the complete absence of it. Castles weren't designed for comfort. They were built to last, and what lasts is stone. Cold, wet, unyielding stone. Walls 3 feet thick. Floors made of flagstone or packed earth. Ceilings that dripped, corners that wept. Warmth was something you chased, not something you owned. Every room was a forecast. You learned to tell what time it was by how cold your fingertips were. Whether rain was coming by the smell of mildew rising from the lower hall. The wind told stories no one wanted to hear. Let's begin with cold. Winter wasn't a season, it was a siege. The great halls had hearths, yes, but they only warmed the fortunate few within reach of the flame. Everyone else, layered wool over wool, socks over cloth over hope, cloaks that never dried, tunics that never stopped smelling of smoke. Some wore straw beneath their clothes for insulation. Others just gave up and shivered until spring. Your breath fogged indoors. Bread froze solid if left on a table too long. Chamber pots cracked. So did morale. Some historians argue medieval castles had impressive heating solutions. Hypocausts, underfloor warming, clever smoke channels. But most of these were reserved for Roman villas, bishops, and fantasy novels. The rest of the world, cursed by the hearth and its fickle radius, moisture was the real enemy, the quiet killer. The castle never dried, not truly. Water seeped through stone with the memory of last year's rain. The walls sweated, the floors glistened, your mattress grew things. Mould bloomed in corners, curled scrolls, softened beams. It grew between toes, behind ears, inside ears. You scratched constantly. You coughed constantly. You stopped wondering if the black streak across the stone was ink, rot, or warning. Boots mildewed while still on your feet. Blankets became biological experiments. Nothing aired out, nothing escaped. A wool cloak worn long enough became part of the person, and funerals included decisions about what to peel off. Wind? A daily companion. The tower windows didn't shut. They were slits for archers, and archers weren't cold, just expected to die quicker. Wind came howling in through every crack, keyhole, loose shutter, and prideful gap between stones. It banged doors. It carried whispers. It flickered torches, lifted hems, and occasionally threw things from shelves with unrepentant force. You never heard wind in the castle. You felt it. In your gums, in your ribs. It rattled your molars and asked personal questions. Rain brought the mud, inside and out. The courtyard turned to soup. The hallways slicked with whatever you tracked in. Cloaks grew heavier by the minute. Your legs itched from the knees down and smelled like a regrettable stew. The roof leaked, sometimes dramatically, other times slowly enough to ruin paper, bread, a birthday, or your one dry sock. And because the castle walls held heat so poorly, summer became its own punishment. Heat pooled in the upper rooms, only not where you slept. You slept low, near the kitchen or cellar, where the fire didn't reach and the damp did. Upstairs the air turned heavy, and food turned faster. Insects came. Flies arrived in orchestras. You tried to swat them until you learned it only made them angrier. Sunlight didn't reach many rooms, so even in July the castle stayed dim. Green and grey and a little sticky. You learned to fear the seasonal shifts, the early cold snaps, the warm Decembers, the March hail. Unpredictable weather meant rotting food, swollen wood, collapsing roofs, coughing fits, and dead pigs, and with it, the boredom. Bad weather meant no deliveries, no letters, no news. The roads turned to soup, the stables turned to shrines of mud. Everything stopped, and so you stayed inside, with each other. The same voices, the same feet, the same snoring, the same stew. Some say the greatest medieval danger was plague or war or betrayal. But many castle deaths happened because someone sneezed in the wrong draught, because someone fell on wet stone, because someone slipped, naked, on a ladder during an unexpected thaw. The castle didn't kill with drama, it killed with atmosphere. You never escaped it. You adapted. You found which doors stuck in wet seasons, which beams dripped, which blankets itched but didn't bite, which furs were warmest when you stole them. You slept fully clothed, you bathed in spring when it was warm enough, and in autumn when you were brave. You learned to eat fast, sleep light, and never trust a dry corner. Not every death in a castle was bloody. Some arrived slowly, quietly, in layers, not with swords or sickness, but with status. Because the most dangerous thing in a medieval castle wasn't always a blade or a bad barrel of wine. It was being out of place. Or worse, being seen thinking you belonged somewhere you didn't. Castles were machines of hierarchy. Every stone had an owner. Every corridor had a tone. Every seat was measured. And everyone, not just nobles, was watching. You didn't just survive the castle physically. You survived it socially. You survived it politely. Start with the seating. The table wasn't just a meal. It was a map. You sat by rank, not relation. High table, low table, bench, stool, floor. Misplace your seat and you weren't corrected. You were noticed. And once noticed, you were interpreted. Some historians argue that medieval etiquette was simple. Know your place, mind your voice, lower your eyes. But even within these rules, there were thousands of tiny traps. Walk behind the wrong person. Stand when you should sit. Enter a room ahead of someone richer. Forget to remove your cap. Remove it too quickly. Bow too low. Bow not enough. Each error had a consequence. Not always immediate, not always spoken, but real. Then there was the hierarchy of labour. Servants had ranks. So did pages, squires, scullions, cooks, torchbearers, falconers, and even jesters. You might scrub a floor, but if you were seen talking to someone who sharpened swords, you might be accused of overreaching. You might be reassigned, or watched, or worst of all, talked about. Castle rumours were as powerful as fire. They spread without effort and with great interest. They changed shape depending on who held them. One overheard comment became conspiracy. One dropped tray became a metaphor. And no one asked your version. You could be undone by a glance. You could be advanced by a whisper. You could also disappear simply by not being noticed enough. Some say the safest servant was the quietest one. But quiet could mean invisible. And invisible meant unnecessary. If a new steward arrived, or a chambermaid married into a different household, or a cousin of the lord brought his own cook, you might find yourself unassigned. No warning, no farewell, just not on the list, so you made yourself useful. Visibly, strategically. You laughed 1 second late, you nodded when asked, you didn't finish your thoughts, you let others finish theirs. You never corrected anyone, especially if they were wrong, especially if it involved history, prayer, or wine. You learnt the power of silence. It wasn't weakness, it was armour. Servants who spoke too much were remembered, and being remembered in a castle wasn't always a kindness. You also learned to watch the nobles, not just for cues but for clues. When a lord clenched his jaw after a toast, when a lady refused the bread, when two guards crossed arms at the same time. These were not coincidences. These were signals. The castle breathed in gestures, and you had to read it. One wrong interpretation, and you could find yourself questioned, excluded, reassigned. Some were sent to the tower for a mistake. No one ever said what the mistake was, but everyone else adjusted their behaviour afterward. Some believe castles were ruled by law, but inside the walls, etiquette was law, and it was always changing. You could fall out of favour for serving cold wine, for laughing during the priest's blessing, for not laughing when the falconer made a joke about the cook's new beard. Some insults were direct, a slap, a thrown crust, a command delivered publicly and loudly. But the real danger lay in the indirect ones. A tray removed before you were done, a door not held, a name not spoken, a task reassigned downward, the Lord saying him instead of you. And then came punishments, not just whippings or beatings. Those were easy to survive. The worst punishments were quiet, reassignment to linen duty during plague season, sent to clear the ice trench barefoot, given a cloak that didn't fit, not invited to the feast, not allowed at morning prayers, made to sleep in the draftiest corner, made to serve someone younger, made to wait outside, or just no eye contact, no acknowledgement, nothing. Some say death in castles came by accident. Others say it was design, but for many the castle killed slowly. A castle is not built for the people inside it. It is built to hold, to resist, to remain. Stone, lime, timber, mortar. Selected for function, not sentiment. Every corridor leads somewhere utilitarian. Every archway is a calculation. Every tower was stacked not with pride, but with proximity to high ground and better angles for arrows. That anyone lived in it at all was almost incidental. Castles didn't need to be kind. They needed to be defensible. They weren't comfortable. They were endurable. And that's what they did best. No matter how many people fell from parapets, or slipped in kitchens, or were reassigned into oblivion, the castle remained in place, cold. Repaired when necessary, expanded when affordable, burned partially, rebuilt pragmatically. There were always replacements, not of people, of roles, of functions. One cookout, another in. One mason buried, another hired. No ceremony, just continuity. Historians catalogue castles by their walls, their battlements, their periods of refurbishment, rarely by who slept in them, who coughed in them, who lost fingers in their kitchens. Survival was never the point. The point was permanence. When the floors buckled or the beams rotted or the gatehouse collapsed inward, under snow weight, the work began. Not to honour what failed, but to restore what remained. Castles were maintained by labour that rarely left records. Scribes wrote about lords, chronicles listed births and sieges, but the list of who cleaned the upper turret, or who replaced the window frame after it shattered in the wind, those names do not survive. They never needed to. The window was replaced. That was enough. There was no gold plaque for the person who realised the soup had spoiled before anyone died. There was no stained glass for the scullion who figured out which barrel leaked rat urine. These were not seen as heroics. They were instructions followed, in some cases accidentally. There is a reason castle inventories include iron nails, smoked fish and shovels, but not headaches, bruises or gritted teeth. Not because they didn't exist, but because the castle didn't care. The floors were swept, the moat was drained, the walls were checked. That was the record. The humans inside a castle were temporary maintenance teams for the broader machine. Some served a season, some a lifetime. Most just until illness or favour or famine shifted the ledger. And then another stepped in. One door stuck, another opened. From above, the structure looked organised, rational, but anyone who worked within its drafty, leaky, rat-shared depths knew. Survival in a castle was about navigating moving parts. Not just traps, blades or moats, but expectations, hierarchies, gut instinct about when not to speak and where to step. The floor in front of the chapel dips slightly to the left. Everyone who walks it knows. It's not written anywhere. Neither is the fact that the mortar on the second floor stairwell wall softens in heavy rain. You feel it. No record. The castle doesn't document these things. It just continues, and the people inside it adjust. This is what a castle's life looks like. The murder hole was repointed. The moat was scraped clean of bodies and barrels. The buttery was moved 2 floors lower because the heat kept curdling the milk. The trapdoor was sealed because a steward fell through it while drunk. These changes aren't celebrated. They're folded in, absorbed, like moss growing over stone, like soot collecting above a hearth, like the scratches carved into a banister over time. Castle repair isn't a narrative. It's a quiet correction. Even damage becomes architectural eventually. A collapsed bell tower becomes part of the skyline. A blocked-off stairwell becomes storage. A forgotten tunnel becomes rumour. The castle does not mind being inaccurate. It minds being intact. That's the metric, not precision, continuity. And continuity always meant losing someone along the way. This was not a tragedy. It was a unit cost. Some historians call this resilience. Others call it neglect. It's both. The castle still stands. It has lost dozens of roofs, hundreds of servants, thousands of tools, the occasional wall, noble, goat and child. But the core holds. A castle doesn't require you to admire it, only to maintain it. The outer wall needs lime. The water wheel needs replacement. The west tower leans but not urgently. There's wood rot in the latrine flooring, but it's been propped with a beam from the stables. The beam is cracked. Eventually, someone will replace it. Or they won't. The floor will give way. Someone will fall. A new beam will be found. The system continues. The castle's job is not to protect your safety. Its job is to look like protection from the outside. Inside, the truth is stone, bone, mildew, soot, and compromise. The ceilings sag. The fire smokes. The wine sours. The list is endless. And then you rinse the bowl, wipe the knife, adjust the shutter, and start the list again.